So starting with the definition of physics that we have just discussed, that physics is the branch of science that deals with matter, energy, and their relationship. As you told, the definition of matter is anything that occupy space. What happened? क्यों हो गया? Where is it gone? Anyhow, we have a definition right here. I'm not going to write it now. In physics, we study matter, energy, and the interaction. And the chapter, the physical quantity is basically, we define physical quantity as anything that could be measured. If you can measure in a certain quantity, it would come under physical quantity. And if you cannot measure it, it won't be a physical quantity. Physical quantity is also defined as a quantity that has magnitude and unit. Magnitude is basically the amount. For example, if I say I have 10 kgs of apple, so 10 is the magnitude and kilogram is the unit. So if something has a magnitude and a unit, it would be a physical quantity. And secondly, anything that you could measure is a physical quantity. Clear?
Yes.
So the branches of physics, we have quantum physics, we have optics, we have electromagnetism, we have relativity, atomic and nuclear physics, oscillations and waves, thermodynamics, and mechanics. I'll explain to you individually. Mechanics basically deals with, I have the definitions of them. Let me take you. So the very first branch of physics that I told you was mechanics, and mechanics deal with the study everything that is in motion. Then the second branch of physics was thermodynamics. Thermodynamics deal with the study of heat and everything of the effects, how heat is transferred, and their effects as well. Sound, it deals with the physical aspect of sound waves, their production and properties and application. Light and optical physics. Let me. Yeah, optics हमारे पास. Mechanics, optics, and thermodynamics हो गया हमारे पास. Optics deal with the study of physical aspects of light, its properties, working and uses, electromagnetism, electricity and magnetism. Electromagnetism is कहते हैं हमारे पास. तो इसके अंदर we study about electricity and magnetism and their relationship. That how electricity could produce magnetism and magnetism could produce electricity. You have studied about electricity and magnetism as well, na? In sciences.
Like in 8th grade or?
Yeah, in the previous class. Electricity. Are you familiar with electricity and magnetism? Na? The basic concept of it. I'm not asking in depth.
Yeah, we had a small topic about it.
The movement of electrons comes electricity, the movement of electrons from one point
Oh,
to another in a
no, not
particular
that
period of time.
detailed.
What have you studied? What do you know about electricity? What do you know about electricity?
It can be used as a source of power.
Yeah.
It conducts through metals.
Yes.
I don't know a lot about it.
Okay, that's fine. What about magnetism? Magnets basically basic magnets जो होते हैं हमारे पास उसकी study जो होती है ना, electricity could produce magnetism and magnetism could produce electricity. Electricity is basically जब conductors की बात करते हैं ना, conductors have free electrons in them. Structure of matter आपने study किया? Have you studied the structure of matter?
Structure of
Conductors
matter,
and insulator. Conductors and insulators.
Yeah, I know what they are.
Okay, we'll talk about them and we'll issue that topic. So quantum physics deals with the study at the subatomic level. Optics is also known as light. Electromagnetism is जो है electromagnetism is a study of electricity and magnetism. Relativity is basically E is equals to mc square. Einstein equation, you might have heard about that.
Yeah.
That energy could be converted into mass and mass could be converted into energy. Energy mass conversion basically is better. We have the Mirage वाक्य जिसके अंदर हम लोगों ने इसको डिस्कस किया है. We are not able to make use of it up till now, but let's see. But basically, if something approaches the speed of light, it could be converted into energy, and energy could be converted into mass. Einstein equation basically explain that to us. Atomic and nuclear physics discusses about the nucleuses, the behavior of protons and neutrons, and fission and fusion reactions. Oscillation and wave would the vibrating motion of the object. It's also associated with the states of matter as well, and thermodynamics, the study of heat. Okay. Then we have physical and non-physical quantities. Physical quantities, what I explained to you, what are physical quantities?
Anything that can be measured
Could be
with the
measured,
magnitude
yes.
in it.
Yes, very good. And non-physical quantities कौन सी होंगी?
Maybe
we
the
cannot
things that
measure.
can't be measured.
Yeah, we cannot measure as a non-physical quantity. Physical quantities are further subdivided into two parts. These it's base quantities and derived quantities. Okay, base quantities are those quantities which could be measured directly, and derived quantities are those which are dependent on other quantities. Okay, base quantities are those, as the term base का meaning क्या होता है? Basic. ठीक है, to the core. Basic quantities are those which could be measured directly, and derived quantities are those which depends on other quantities. Derived quantities which depends on other quantities. There are only 7 base quantities which could be measured directly. Okay, that we need to memorize it. That is mass, time, length, temperature, current, amount of substance, and intensity of light. Okay, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay. There are only these 7 quantities which we can measure directly. Mass, time and length. Mass को हम physical balance से measure कर लेंगे, time को stopwatch से directly measure कर लेंगे, length with the help of scale, temperature with the help of thermometer, current with the further और आगे जाते रहेंगे तो आपको आइडिया तो रहेगा कि base quantities are one which could be directly measured. मतलब हम apparatus लेंगे and will have the value. But derived quantities are those for which we do you know the formula of weight or force?
I think I read it in the book.
Density?
I don't have it memorized.
Volume?
I haven't memorized it.
Volume, generally in maths, you might have studied the formula of volume. Length into base into height.
Volume. Oh yeah.
Or area, length into base. Okay? That is, volume is a derived quantity. I'm discussing about this formula so that you are familiar with that. Thoda bahut. Length into base into height. So in order to measure volume, I need length, base, and height. So such quantities which depends on other quantities are known as derived quantities. Okay? Here is the one जो definition मैंने आपको start में बताई थी ना, physical quantities are those which have numerical magnitude and unit. अब 1.65 meters के अंदर 1.65 is the magnitude and meter is the unit. Base quantities
Sir,
की definition.
I think the
Yes.
screen is frozen.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, now I can see it.
You must have missed all this part then, है ना?
No, I
But
was
verbally you
listening
were,
to it.
yeah, well, you were only listening. Anyhow, base quantities are physical quantities as the simplest form, such that all other physical quantities can be derived from them. The physical quantities obtained by multiplying or dividing base quantities are known as derived. As I told you before, that quantities which could be measured directly are base quantities, and quantities which depends on other quantities on base quantities are known as derived quantities. Okay. These are the 7 base quantities: length, mass, time, current, temperature, amount of substance, and intensity. And their respective units are units. We have base units, okay? And they are base units are the one that we use whenever we use these quantities, we use these units. Okay? So whenever we're going to use length, we'll use meter. We'll use mass for kilograms, time, seconds, ampere, current. For current, we use the unit of ampere. For temperature, we'll use Kelvin. Base units are basically the units that whenever we are doing any calculations, now we make sure that we're using these units. If these units are not given, we need to convert them into base units. Okay? And derived units are those units which are derived from base units. For example, density. Density could be measured is equals to mass over volume. Mass has a unit of kilogram and volume has a unit of meter cube. So derived units which are derived from base units are known as derived units. Okay? There are no fixed quantity to drive. There are so many drive units, but base units are only 7 in number. ठीक हो गया? I think so. We should. So then we have scientific notations and physical, prefixes. Scientific notations, numbers written in power of tens. So when if we have a number 180,320, decimal is always present at the end of the number. Okay, whether it's written or not, we will use that anyhow. So if we move the decimal backwards, number of points we moved, we get it as power. So I have moved how many numbers? 6 decimal. So it would be 1.8 into 10 raised to power 6. If I move the decimal forward, I'll get a negative power. Okay. So if we want to increase a positive power, we move decimal further backward and vice versa. Similarly, to increase negative power, we move decimal forward and vice versa. तो कन्वेंशन ऑफ यूनिट्स हम लोगों को वहां पे हेल्प आउट करेगा. एंड जो प्रीफिक्सेस थे, we need to memorize all these. Hexa, peta, tera, we normally don't use these. Maximum up till giga, in positive power mega, kilo and deca barely. Negative powers के अंदर हम लोग mostly centi, milli, micro, nano and pico use करते हैं. femto and atto rarely हम लोग use करते हैं. ठीक है? And these are the few of the convenience that if you will review that, it will help you out in the code. We have significant figures, scalar and vectors depends upon the dependent quantities which needs only magnitude and vector. Do you know how to draw a vector?
Like put the arrow above the letter.
Yes. So the length of the vector represents magnitude and the arrowhead tells the direction. ठीक हो गया? Whenever we talk about vectors, to add two vectors, we take help from head to tail rule. They might be head to tail rule, but okay. In order to add two vectors, you familiar with head to tail rule?
I've done it once.
Okay, let's do that. In order to add vectors, we use head to tail rule. It tells us that the head of first vector coincides with the tail of second vector. A resultant is drawn in such a way that head coincides with the head and tail with the tail. Supposedly, we have two vectors drawn like this. Okay. First, we need to make sure is this is vector 1 and this is vector 2. First thing that we need to make sure is that this is the tail and this is the head. The head of first vector coincides with the tail or whatsoever. So if I redraw this vector here, now we have head to tail. Head is coinciding with the tail. Whenever we need to add two vectors, we have to make this sure that the head of first vector is coincide with the tail of second vector. It does not have it. We can draw this as well. Redraw vector 2 here. Okay? This is vector exactly in that direction parallel to first vector. The resultant vector is drawn in such a way that like this. Its head coincides with the head and tail coincides with the tail. So in either case, if I redraw vector 2 here or draw vector 1 here, we'll get the resultant vector same. ठीक हो गया? So this resultant vector will give you will be equal to the sum of the vector of both the vectors. So the head you could see here, the head of first vector coinciding with the tail of second vector, and resultant is drawn. We draw it ourselves. Resultant is drawn in such a way that its heads coincide with the head and tail coincides with the tail. ठीक है? Whatever the position is, जो addition of vectors we can also do it using parallelogram method. But again, the concept of head to tail remains same. ठीक हो गया? उसमें क्या होता है? For example, if I have two vectors like this. Actually, उसमें यहाँ पे नहीं, मैं थोड़ा नीचे draw कर लेता हूँ. So that. अब I have this vector. I need to add these two vectors. मैं क्या parameters को first of all approach करूँगा? What would be the first thing that I would do? Can I add these vectors like this? Or do I need to redraw the vectors?
I think you need to redraw them, but
I
I
can
don't know
redraw
about
this vector, write this, parallel to the vector. We can redraw the vector parallel to the vector. Or if I redraw this vector, it would go like this. Do you see the shape of the parallelogram?
Yeah.
ठीक है? Again, rule वही है, head to tail. Whenever I redraw the vector right in front of that vector, parallel to that vector, I get the head to tail thing ready. Just by, so the main thing is whether I redraw this vector, matlab I redraw this vector here, or I redraw this vector here. In either case, I will get the resultant vector as same as I've shown in the previous one. So resultant vector कैसे हम draw करेंगे? Is this how I would draw the resultant vector, or the other way?
The other way.
Because resultant vector is drawn in such a way that its head should coincide with the head and tail with the tail. Whenever I draw the vector like this now, like this, a closed vector, it would give us a resultant as 0. Okay? So in order to have a resultant, a head must coincide with the head and tail must coincide with the tail. If there comes a question and he asks you to identify the resultant vector, how would you identify the resultant vector? It would only be when whose head would be coinciding with the head and tail coinciding with the tail. That would be the resultant vector. Okay. So that's how we add two vectors. So far we have studied about physics, the definition of physics, what matter and energy is, the branches of physics. Then we came to physical quantities. Physical quantities divided into physical quantities के दो portions हैं हमारे पास. I'll write as physical quantity में हमारे पास base and derived quantity आ जाती है, and physical quantities में scalar and vector भी आ जाती है. ठीक है, respective definitions and उनकी units हम लोगों ने देख लिए हैं. Then we discussed about the scientific notations. We discussed about the prefixes, and there's one thing I think so that's all. Significant figures भी basically होते हैं. Let's north, south, east, west. ये scale होता है. Scale of the vector आपको idea है? When we have bigger lengths to draw, na, we make a scale out of it. That is 5 kilometers equals 1 centimeter, 20 kilometer would be equals to 4 centimeter. That's how जो longer lengths जो हैं हम उनको vector की form में draw करते हैं. ठीक है? अब उसने हमें statement क्या दिया हुआ था? Representation of helicopter as it moves 20 kilometers from origin towards 60 degrees south of west. अगर आपने वेस्ट ऑफ साउथ बोला तो हम लोग डिग्री एंगल्स जो है वो यहाँ पे ड्रॉ कर देते हैं. बाकी ये देखो जो जीरो रिजल्टेंट का था, देखो अब इसमें रिजल्टेंट हमारे पास, अब यहाँ पे रिजल्टेंट वेक्टर हेड टेल कोइंसाइडिंग विद द टेल एंड हेड कोइंसाइडिंग विद द हेड. ठीक है, दैट्स हाउ वी आइडेंटिफाई द रिजल्ट. बाकी उसका मीनिंग हेड टू टेल का वही रहेगा, इट वुड नॉट चेंज. व्हेनेवर दे हमें हेड टू वेक्टर्स को ऐड अप करना है, वी वुड ऑलवेज अप्रोच द हेड टू टेल मेथड.